Okay, this is a revision question on cost of capital. Cost of capital is, you now, let's say for example, you've now chosen project P and you realize you don't have enough funds. So now you need to go and accumulate funds, right? Now where can you get it? You can get it internally or you can get it externally, right? Internally will normally be equity, which is shares or last year's profits. Now, shares, you get your ordinary shares, you get your preference shares. Last year's profits is called retained earnings, right? So you can get this from shares and retained earnings. Or you can go and borrow externally. Externally is debt, right? You go to the bank and then you go and borrow your money. Now, you need to remember, there's always two things that they will ask you, right? You need to have the market value, and the market value is always in rands. Or you need to have your cost, and your cost is always in percentage, right? So they will either give you one, then you must calculate the other, but in most cases they will expect you to calculate both when it comes to equity, but normally they will give you the one and they will expect you to calculate the cost of the capital, right? Now what you need to remember, there's normally four types or four categories in your description, right? One would be equity, the other retained earnings. Now equity would normally be your ordinary shares. Then you have retained earnings, which is your last year profit. Then you have preference shares, which are also shares, but they are shares with preference. Normally they are more expensive than your ordinary shares. And four, you have debt. Now what I'm telling you, or they could give you debentures. Debentures is also like external, it's like debt. So they can give you, ask you all four, or we can ask you three, right? Or we can ask you two, it just depends. So now I'm going to do this question, and this is how I suggest, you do it to make it easier. Firstly, I want to identify my description, right? Once I have this, let's call it A. Okay, then I'm going to go to B. B is, what did they give me? Did they give me market value and they want me to calculate cost, or is it the other way around? And from there, it is smooth sailing, because then you just need to do the WACC table, right? So it says here, required. Always important to go to required to see what it is that they want. They want you to calculate cost of ordinary share capital. They want you to calculate the cost of debt. They want you to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. Now, can you see they're telling you they want you to calculate cost? Okay, so now I'm going to first do A. I'm going to go and look for all my categories, right? So it says Edgar's Limited had diversified into the oil industry through the 100% acquisition of Built Limited. Built Limited has 100,000 ordinary shares. You need to know ordinary shares is equity, right? Of 2 Rand each. So they gave you number of shares and they gave you cost for 1 share. Okay. Then they say comma, 450 retained earnings. Okay, so yeah, they're giving us our retained earnings. So we have equity, we have retained earnings, 15%, 600 preference shares. Okay, so they give us preference shares as well. And a long-term loan of 300,000 from ABC Bank, right? So this is a loan, and a loan is debt. So here I can already see I have my 4 categories. It says this loan attracts an interest rate of 13% per annum. The oil industry on the stock exchange has shown a market return of, so for now, what I would love to do, right, you can either do it A, B, and C, or you start with C. Now, when you start with C, I'm going to start with C today. You can start from A, but for me, it's just, I want to have my WAC column or my WAC table and just fill in what I've already been given in my question, right? So I'm going to mark it clearly, which will be C, and this would be my WAC. Now, WAC has 5 tables, right? The first one is description, right? I have my descriptions, right? I know it's equity, retained earnings. Now, don't write RE, write it out in full. I'm just going to say RE. Then we have preference shares. Don't write PS, write preference shares out in full. And then I'm just going to call a debt, which is the loan, right? And then I have my market value. Remember, my market value is always in rands. I'm going to make a column here. And then I have my weight. Now, my weight basically says, of the 100%, and weight is always at percentage as well. So my weight actually says, let me just write here, total for my market value, and my weighting must always be 100%. Now, this basically means of the money that I need to borrow, how much, what is the weight of equity? What is the weight of retained earnings? What is the weight of my preference shares? And what's the weight of my debt, right? Sometimes your debt will weigh much less than equity. That means that you're going to get more of your money or your funding internally. Okay, then we have our cost, which is also in percentage. And then we have our WAC, right? Now, what I love doing, I love just putting numbers there. WAC is also in percentage. So this is column 1, column 2, column 3, and column 4. And column 4 is equal to column 2 multiplied by column 3. Okay. So there's my WAC column. And before I even go further, as I'm going to read through, because you see I've done A already, right? As I'm going to read through my question, I am now going to determine what did they give me and what do I still need to calculate, right? Now, as I go further, remember we've got the 2 categories, actually 3 categories, right? So we have our market rate or market value, and we have our cost. We know that our market value is in rands and our cost is in percentage, right? So we have equity. Now, equity, there's 2 types that they can ask you to calculate when it comes to cost. But for market rate, right, there's also 2 types. You get the Gordon growth model, we don't usually use that, and you get the market capitalization. Market capitalization takes the number of shares multiplied by the per share, right? Now, hashtag for me, it's like a symbol for number. So if they give me number of shares times for 1 share, they're asking me to calculate the market capitalization. Market capitalization is let's just do this, market rate. Then you get your cost, right? Your cost, you also have 2 types for equity. You have the Gordon growth model, and that is D1 divided by KE plus G. The other one is called the CAPM. Now, CAPM is the market capital asset pricing model. Now, this model basically takes into consideration stuff like risk-free. Now, what is risk-free? They actually say that government bonds is risk-free. It's got no risk, right? and it has a market premium. Now, market premium is always your market rate minus your risk-free. And if you see the word beta, as soon as you see beta, you must know they're asking for CAPM, and the formula is risk-free plus beta, open bracket, your market rate minus your risk-free. That's how you calculate your CAPM. Then we have preference shares. Preference shares, it's normally just your dividend less, the amount that you get, but we normally don't expect you to calculate it. Or we can give you number of shares times cost per share, then you can calculate it that way. And then your cost, we normally don't expect you to calculate it, but we will make a statement and we will talk about either similar shares, right? Similar shares basically means then we use that, or we can use the percentage that they give us. And then we have our debt. We don't normally require the calculation of our market rate, but our cost is always KD is equal to I 1 minus T. Now, what this actually means is that the interest that you normally pay, the interest that you are charged at the bank, right? This interest is before or tax included, so you need to take out the tax. Why? Because there is a tax benefit. Okay, so these are the formulas that we are going to use. Now we're going to jump into our question. We're going to see what information did they give us, what can we plot on our table, and what do we need to calculate. Right. Now, you don't have to do it like this. For me, it's just that I don't like reading, and while I read, I want to put in my information. Okay, so yeah, we've got, and then you can basically, if to make it easier, right, first we know they gave us equity. Why? Because they said Build Limited has 100,000 ordinary shares at 2 Rand each. Remember what is, when they give you a number of shares, times cost per share, they want you to calculate the CAPM. So we know that our market rate will be the 100,000 shares times 2 Rand each. So it is times 2 Rand. So the shares, the market value, the Rand value is 200,000. Is it 100,000? Yes, it's 100,000. Let's just make sure. 100,000 times 2 Rand each. So our market value is 200,000, right? Rand. Okay. So we're done with this one. Then it says 450 for retained earnings. Yeah, we just put in our 450. Then they say 600 shares of 1 Rand 50 each. So our preference shares also speaking about 600 at 1 Rand 50 each. Is 900. So yeah, we put in our 900. Okay, and then we have our long-term loan of 300,000, and there we put in our 300,000. Now, can you see? We are already done with our market rate. So we're going to our market value column. So we're going to say our 200 plus our 450 plus our 900 plus our 300 is equal to 1850, 123. Now we want to calculate our weight. So how do you calculate your weight? You take, so let's say weight is 2, right, is equal to, you take your total divided by your description. So we're going to take our total, and we're going to say, actually the other way around. You take your it's the other way around. You take your description divided by your total, multiply by 100. Right. So nowhere did the question say round off, so we're just going to use it as is. So we say 200 divided by 1850 is equal to times 100 is 10. Okay, let's say, make a 10.8. Remember, this answer is in percentage. Then we're going to say 450 divided by 1850, times 100 is 24.3. Let's say 24.3. And then we do the 900 divided by 1850 times 100 is 48.6. Now what I love doing, right? I stop after I've done my 3. Then I take my 100, I minus this to then be able to see plus minus what my last weight needs to be. So I say 100 minus 48.6 minus 24.3 minus 10.8. So my weighting needs to be 16.3. So then I calculate it as normal. So at least I have an idea what my weighting needs to be. 16.2. That basically means that I can now just change one of the amounts. Remember, this must be equal to 100. So I'm going to say 16.2, and then I'm going to change this 8 to a 9, right? So that it can balance. Okay, so I'm going to say 10.9 plus 24.3 plus 48.6 plus 16.2 gives me 100. I'm happy, right? Then I've got my cost and my WACC. Okay, now my question basically starts with the requirements. Then the requirement says calculate the ordinary share capital, CAPM. Doesn't always have to tell you that, but you need to know. Once the information that you are given, it should lead you to tell you what is the calculation you need. Do they want you to do the Gordon growth, or do they want you to do the CAPM? Okay, so let's go. So they tell us, yeah, Bolt Limited has 100,000 ordinary shares of 2 Rand each. We are done with that, right? Then it says 450, we are done for retained earnings. Now for retained earnings, if they do not ask you to calculate the cost, always use the one used for equity, right? Then they say 15%, 600 preference shares at 1 Rand 50 each. We done the long-term loan of 300 ABC loan. It says this loan attracts an interest rate of 13% per annum. Now remember, this 13% has tax. We need to take the tax out. It says the oil industry. Let's just do this. The oil industry, so that we know this is just for the cost. The oil industry on the stock exchange has a market return of 16%, right? While government stocks, when you see words like government stocks, you need to know it's risk-free. And bonds have an average annual rate of 12%. So this we already know. This is our RF. Bolt Limited shares have a beta of 1.5. We know that this is beta. And Bolt Limited pays a corporate tax of 40%, right? So our market return, this is our RM. Okay, so now we're going to start. Now they want us to first calculate our cost of ordinary shares, right? And they tell us it's CAPM. Remember, they don't always have to tell us that, because you can identify risk-free, your risk market or your market return, and your beta then you should already be able to identify that's what they want, right? So our cost is equal to our risk-free plus our beta. Please, guys, always write the formula, right? You get marks for it. And then I'm just going to substitute. Now, what did they say? My risk-free, the question said it was 12%. My market return was 16%. That's what they gave us. And they said beta was 1.5. Right. So I'm just going to substitute it in there. My risk-free is 12. Now, what I normally do, I write the figures without a percentage, but I know, and I always bear in mind, my answer always needs to be in percentage. So I'm just going to write 12 for my risk-free plus my beta, which is 1.5. I open my bracket. My risk-free is 16, and my market return is 16, and my risk-free is 12. Okay, so then I do my calculation. Some of you might want to do it the long way. It's fine, of which we will say 12 plus 1.5, and then we calculate what is in the bracket. So it's 4, and then we just say 12 plus 1.5, or just 12 plus 6 is equal to 18%. And then I go to my table, and for my equity, I just put in 18%. Remember, if you put the percentage on top, you don't have to put it in here. But if you don't put a percentage on top, you need to put percentage with every amount. Okay, so we are done with our equity. They didn't say anything with regards to calculating your retained earnings, so I will use 18 as well for my retained earnings. And my preference shares, they didn't say anything about similar shares, but they did say it's 15% shares, so then we put in our 15%, and now we only need to calculate our cost of debt. So then we're going to say cost of debt. Remember, what is our formula? Is KD is equal to our interest, open bracket, 1 minus T. What is our tax rate? They said it is 40%. They said 40% is the corporate tax. And what is the interest? The interest is 13. So is 13%. So how do I calculate it? I say 13. Open bracket, 1 minus. Now remember, this is a percentage. I want to change it to a number. How do I do that? I divide it by 100, which will give me 0.40. Okay, so then 1 minus 0.40. Sorry, I normally use my other calculator, but the one I have now doesn't do brackets. So 0.40. Well, 1 minus 0.40 will basically give you 0.60. Okay, let's just say, so I'm going to do the bracket first. 1 minus 0.40 gives me 0.60. So I just say 13 multiplied by 0.60 gives me 7.8%. This is the interest without tax. This is the interest including tax. So I'm just going to say 7.8. And then I am done with my table. Now, I'm going to calculate my WACC. How do I calculate WACC? I say column 2 multiplied by column 3. Now, what I normally do, I take the most difficult number and I keep it as a number. And then the easy one I convert, or I use percentage. What I mean by that, if I look at these two numbers, it's easier to calculate 18 as a percentage, right, than 10.9. So I will keep 10.9 as a number, and I will say multiply by 18%. I will keep 24.3 as a number, and I will say multiply by 18%. 48.6 multiply by 15%, and then 16.2 multiply by 7.8%. Okay. So remember, 7.8%, this is, I'll have to convert it to a number, but let's start. So we're going to say 10.9 multiply by 18%. So this is 1.962. Leave it to 3 decimals. It is actually safer. Then we're going to say 24.3. Can you see I put it in as a number? Multiply, but I've converted 18 to a percentage, which would be 4.374. And then I'll say 4.86 multiply by 15% is 7.29. And then I say 16.2 multiply by 7.8%, 1263. Okay, and then I add this up, and this will give me my WACC, which is 1962 plus 4.374 plus 7.29 plus 1.263. Now, this means 14.889%. This is your WACC. And this means this is called your optimal amount. So according to whatever you want to do, if your rate of return is anything above this, it is good. Anything below this, it means you are paying too much. Then you rather leave the project. So if we have to take the project that we did in the other question, which is 15%, it means that you are making a profit. But I mean, honestly, it is a very measly profit. Not even 1%, you know. So then you need to compare. But this is how you calculate your WACC. This is how you always do it every time. Remember, you are welcome to start from your calculations, then do your WACC table. But I just like doing my WACC table first, and then before I even start my calculations, I take what I've been given and I put it in my table. Thank you so much. See you for our next lesson.